Anyone who is watching from the UK will know that we don't exactly have the most interesting flora and fauna. But despite this, we still host some truly amazing wildlife. Just not all of it is ours. You see, most of our wildlife isn't actually native, with over 2,000 non-native species existing across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, some of which pose a serious threat not only to the native flora and fauna, but to the economy and infrastructure itself. So in today's video, we're going to look at just 5 of these species that are not only non-native to the UK, but are now considered invasive. But which species will we be looking at? Well, let's find out. Firstly, we have to actually define what an invasive species is, which is actually a little more complicated than it sounds. You may be thinking that any animal that isn't native to the UK who is sighted in the wild here would be considered an invasive species, but species such as the walrus that have been sighted in the UK several times since the 1900s don't fall under this category. Instead, these are classified as vagrant species, as they arrived in the UK under their own power with no involvement from humans. So okay, there has to be some involvement from humans. So any species that isn't from the UK that is introduced by humans is considered invasive then, right? Well, kinda. So long as you have been introduced after the 12th century. Any species introduced between this time period and 6100 BCE are considered naturalized species. Why these times? Well, 6100 BCE is roughly around the time the UK became isolated from the rest of mainland Europe. So species introduction by humans was kinda the only way for non-swimming or flying species to reach here. And as for the 12th century, this is roughly around the time sailing and trade was becoming more widespread. So the chances of invasive species arriving in the UK was a lot more likely. So any species that was introduced during this time is known as a naturalized species, which means that they have been in the UK long enough to have become a part of the ecosystem. An example of this might be the rabbit. I say might as it is known for definite that the Normans introduced rabbits after their conquest of England, but rabbits may have been present in the UK as far back as Roman times. But this is known from little archaeological data, and before anyone who is definitely smarter than me comments that rabbits are known from Great Britain at the time of the last ice age, whilst this is true, they didn't exist in Britain long enough to establish a population. So, as long as you arrived in Britain as a result of humans and did so after the 12th century, you are considered an invasive? Yeah, no, there is one more thing. You have to pose a threat to native wildlife. You see, many species fit the first 2 criteria, but don't fit the third. As a result, these species are just referred to as non-native. But once a species ticks all 3 of these, they can now be considered as invasive, and some go above and beyond in assuring they tick this 3rd box. So, with all that admin out of the way, let's talk about our first critter. The eastern grey squirrel is a species of rodent native to the eastern United States. Here it can be found roaming mainly broadleaf forests where it feeds predominantly on the nuts of these trees. In the US, the grey squirrel is a popular game species with hunters, with upwards of 40 million killed per year. This, along with predation by bobcats, raccoons, and various snake species, helps keep the population in check. And a good thing too, as like most rodents, they can produce large litters of young, with grey squirrels having upwards of 10 to 12 in each brood, sometimes giving birth twice a year. This tenacious breeding of the squirrel, however, would help it once it reached the UK in the 1870s. It was introduced by landowners who wished to embellish their estates, because I know what I'd want to spruce up my accommodation: squirrels. From these introductions, the squirrel would quickly begin to spread, facilitated by the fact that it was introduced in several areas across the nation, widening its range before it even began to become invasive. This arrival quickly became a problem for the native red squirrel, as once the grey squirrel began establishing populations across the UK, the red squirrel has seen a decline in population numbers. This is due to several reasons, one being competition from the invaders. You see, these two species occupy similar niches to one another, but with the grey squirrel outweighing the reds by over 200 grams, interspecific contests over resources are usually won by the larger greys. Man, so much for sizes and everything. Well, actually, it isn't everything in this situation, because along with this, the red squirrels are also facing the problem of viruses brought by the greys, namely the Squirrelpox virus. This virus causes lesions to appear on the face and limbs of the animal, leading to death within 10 to 15 days. Luckily for the grey squirrels, however, they don't have to experience this, as they are asymptomatic and are not affected by the virus. Unfortunately, however, red squirrels are. As a result, this virus has been named as a key contributor to the decline of the reds, with grey squirrel populations increasing 25 times in areas where the virus is present. So, with these factors taken into account, it's clear to see how this species has become such a well-established invader. Switching from fauna to flora, we have the bane of every gardener's existence in the UK, Japanese knotweed. Originally from regions of Japan, China and Taiwan, this plant is characterised by having long bamboo-like stems that can grow upwards of 5 meters in height, with leaves and flowers that are creamy in colour. This exotic look made it appealing to the Victorians, who brought the plant over for ornamental purposes. But soon after this, the first recorded instance of escape from cultivation by the plant occurred, and over 100 years later it has spread across most of the UK. This was achieved by a process known as vegetative propagation, which is where the plant spreads from roots that are underground and sprout new leaves every year. These networks can often be 2 meters deep underground and spread 7 meters away from the parent plant. This spread has led to the plant being a severe problem not only in the UK but also in the US, where it has become one of the most problematic invasive species. This is because the plant is incredibly persistent and aggressive with its growth, as the stems will often grow towards any source of water, and trust me when I say they'll do anything to get to the water, with the plant being known to damage structures such as drains. On some occasions, the plant has even been known to break through the walls of and even get underneath houses, sometimes leading to structural damage. All this, coupled with the time-consuming nature of its removal, means the plant can cost the UK economy upwards of £166 million a year. And to think all this because Victorians thought the plant looked cool. Heading back to the States, we have the signal crayfish. Within its home ranges, this crustacean is known to be an ecosystem engineer, which are species that modify the habitat they are in. This is done by them burrowing into the sediment of the water in which they live, which can release nutrients into the water, changing its composition. It was brought to Europe in the 1960s, and in 1975 it made its way to the UK to be used as an aquaculture product. But the crayfish didn't stay in these farms for long. This animal would get into the wild either by escaping these farms or being deliberately released, and has since developed several populations across the UK. Just like the grey squirrel, the arrival of the signal crayfish has wreaked havoc on the native crayfish of the UK, the white-clawed crayfish. And just like the grey squirrel, this is mainly the result of a disease that the invasives are immune to. This time round, it's the fault of crayfish plague. This dramatic sounding illness is a fungal infection that sometimes can impair the animal's coordination and force them out during the daytime, even though crayfish are typically nocturnal. Unfortunately, these symptoms aren't common, and the first sign of infection may be the animal's death itself. Their role as ecosystem engineers also plays a problematic role in the UK. With them being burrowers, this can lead to problems such as reduced riverbank stability, which in turn increases the risks of flooding. feeding. Along with this, they also eat fish eggs and smaller fish species, and remove vegetation which can affect the environmental suitability for native fish species. Truly, a lot of damage from such a small species. Back to the plants now for our next species, Dendrum Ponticum. Native to the Iberian Peninsula, this shrub can grow up to 5 meters tall and produces strikingly beautiful violet-purple flowers. Despite a limited range in the modern day, this plant used to stretch much further, but as a result of cooler temperatures during the last ice age, the species shrunk in distribution. This plant was brought to the UK in 1763 from Spain as an ornamental plant. Alongside its beautiful colour, this plant also had a feature that helped its popularity with gardeners: its self-seeding capabilities, which allowed it to naturally scatter its seeds. This ability would as a result help it spread once it was introduced to woodlands. This was done so in order to provide cover for game birds such as pheasants, but it quickly spread from these populations and now covers roughly 3.3% of Britain's woodland. This is problematic as it occupies both coniferous and broadleaf forests, where it forms huge dense bushes of thick vegetation that block the sun from reaching areas of the forest floor and leading to other wild plants and trees getting smothered by the rhododendron. It's not like the plant can be controlled through consumption by animals either, as the leaves are toxic and repel most wildlife. A true example of beautiful but deadly. Finally, we come to by far the smallest invasive species on the list, the New Zealand flatworm. 10 points if you can guess where this one comes from. Joking aside, within its home range, it is generally confined to woodlands and gardens, where it lives in crevices found within the soil, feeding on a variety of invertebrates such as snails, earthworms, and even other flatworms. This species is said to be distasteful to most animals that try to eat it, which is said to be because of the mucus they produce whenever they are disturbed. This has resulted in research on the natural enemies of these animals to be very limited. It was first brought to the UK in the 1960s by accident, as it more than likely arrived in contaminated soil being transported from New Zealand for use in the garden trade. This method of entry appears to be quite common, with 17 of the 21 species of flatworm in the UK being invasive. Since its arrival, the New Zealand flatworm has begun being very problematic as a result of its dietary habits. Originally thought to be feeders of dead wood, it was later found that flatworms are instead carnivores that feed on the aforementioned invertebrates. One in particular has had a pretty rough time due to this predation: earthworms. In certain areas of the UK, earthworm populations have been driven to near extinction due to the predation by flatworms. This has bigger effects than just the extinction of the earthworm. You see, earthworms are an important creature in agriculture due to their burrowing behaviour, allowing for the soils to be oxygenated and allowing for water to be drained into the soil. So you can probably guess that their loss would definitely cause a few problems. Once again, proving that invasive species, no matter the size, can have huge impacts on ecosystems. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed that video, learning all about 5 invasive species from the United Kingdom. If you want another video listing 5 more, please let me know in the comments, or if you'd like me to do a follow-up video about control methods for these species, also drop a comment below. If you know anyone else interested in this topic, please send the video their way, or if you're interested in this natural world of ours, please consider subscribing or following the Instagram page in the description below. Until next time, bye-bye. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed that video, learning about 5 invasive. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed that video, learning all about 5 invasive.